Good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I would like to express my grateful thanks to the staff of ICHR at the headquarters, at the Bangalore Center, and at the Gauhati Center, and of course the Pune Center for their courtesy of inviting me to give a brief talk about the contributions of my esteemed Guru, revered Guru, the late Professor H.D. Sankalia. And actually, after I agreed to give this lecture, I don't know how I contracted cold and cough. I'm still not out of it completely, but then I will try to, speak to you as coherently as possible. And in between, if there are some gaps, I will apologize in advance. Again, thanks to the ICHR chairman, members of the board of management, and the entire staff at the headquarters and all the three regional centers. And I think all of you agree with me that Professor Sankalia was and continues to be the most outstanding spokesman of Indian archaeology after independence. Here, as a student of epigraphy, I did long ago epigraphy. I am reminded of the famous Nasik inscription of Gautami Balasri, the revered mother of Gautamiputra Shatakarni. And Gautamiputra died very early. And in this inscription, his mother, Gautami Balasri, gives an eulogy of the achievements of his deceased son, Gautami Putra Shatakarni. And she says, as those of you who have specialized in epigraphy will recall, Gautami Putra Shatakarni's horses drank the waters of the three oceans, and she calls him Eka Brahmana. I will transfer that great epithet to my Guru, the late Professor H.D. Sankalia. And indeed, he is the Eka Brahmana of Indian archaeology after independence, and he continues to be till a suitable replacement is arrived at. And I don't see any suitable replacement in foreseeable future. Now, the day he passed away, I and Dr. my esteemed colleague, unfortunately, he is also gone. The late Professor M.L.K. Murthy visited Professor Sankalia at his bangala on the Deccan College campus. It was around 6 o'clock on the 27th of January 1989. He was actually, very weak because there was probably lack of proper nutrition. He was not able to shave for months together. And in fact, he was looking like one of our ancient rishis. And when we visited him, he was there in his armchair, completely lost. He was not really fully conscious. I just gently touched his hand, and immediately he alerted himself. He woke up, and I told him, Professor M.L.K. Murthy is with us. And the words he uttered, yes, upper Paleolithic. Because Dr. M.L.K. Murthy is the person who found the first, irrevocable evidence of blade period assemblages of the Indian Upper Paleolithic. That was in the late 60s. And now Upper Paleolithic is accepted as an important cultural phase in Indian history. Before that, there was a lot of high debate. And the point is, and the same night, Professor Sankalia passed away. So what I want to say, because he wrote his autobiography, Born for Archaeology, I would like to say he was not only born for archaeology, he lived archaeology the whole life, undivided attention he gave to it, and he breathed, even in the last minutes of his life, he breathed archaeology. Even in that semi-conscious condition, his mind was alert, and it was still, full of his experiences in archaeology, and he could recollect the important contribution which MLK Murthy made. He muttered these words. I think these were the last words he uttered, and then the same night he passed away. See, I think this is something very important to remember, because he really, as I said earlier on some other occasions, to Professor Sankalia, archaeology was his breakfast, it was his lunch, and it was his dinner too. And also, I must tell you that Professor Sankalia had the greatest respect to ICHR. And in fact, Professor Rajesh Sharma took him on the very first governing council in 1972. I don't know whether he was able to attend all the meetings for 2 or 3 years, but he always used to tell us, remind us of the important work going on in ICHR. And I emphasize this to sort of make a contrast between some of the archaeologists in India. Not all of them are aware of the kind of uh, input ICHR gave to archaeology from all points of view. And one of the very senior archaeologists, even in his latest book, I think I will avoid mentioning the name, it's all left to you to infer. And these archaeologists took objections to the very establishment of ICHR, to the Marxist orientation which it supposedly had from 72 to 2014, and this supposedly BJP orientation which it got supposedly, it got in 2014. And in other words, not very favorable ideas about the ICHR and its contribution to the growth of archaeology. And I am certainly one among the archaeologists who would like to offer on my behalf, on behalf of the whole archaeological community in India, my appreciation to the wonderful support which the ICHR has been giving right from 1972 to archaeology at various levels, whether they are JRFs, whether they are SRFs, whether they are senior fellowships, whether they are national fellowships, and whether they are research projects. In fact, I got 2 projects from ICHR and so many others. Whether the support of ICHR to seminars, conferences, publication grants for publishing, and also on more than one occasion, including the present occasion, archaeologists have been appointed as the chairpersons of the ICHR. But most important, the ICHR MOU says that prehistory, protohistory, numismatics, epigraphy, numismatics, coins, these are also part of historical research. And I think I am not flattering anybody, I am not exaggerating when I say if Indian archaeology has received support, financial and otherwise, the biggest support from any agency, I think it is from the ICHR. It is possible that any academic institution, has some perspectives, these change from time to time. But I think we should look at the things in a larger perspective and avoid the tendency of throwing away the baby with bath water. ICHR, like many other institutions, may have some shortcomings, may have some flaws, but I think to ignore the very fundamental contributions which ICHR made to historical research is, I think, suicidal. And I think that kind of tendency I will never adopt, nor would I advise my younger colleagues in Indian archaeology to adopt such a trend of thought. Now, these are, I think, important things which I wanted to mention. Now, today's topic is something like Professor H.D. Sankalia, who is, of course, known as a great archaeologist. But then he also made, simultaneously extensive use of what I call soft sources for reconstructing India's past in a very comprehensive sense. India's past, is multidimensional. There are so many aspects to it. Not only he made use of various kinds of archaeological sources, but simultaneously from the very beginning of his career in 39 till his end, he was also making use of the soft sources. In short, we may call these soft sources tradition. See, and tradition and various components of it form the soft sources. Archaeology being a discipline which deals with the actual materials, we can call for the time being. You may have your own pages, but I call the archaeological sources as the hard source. Hard sources versus soft sources. And as I said earlier, right from the beginning of his career, he was using these sources as complementary, not contradictory sources for arriving at a proper and meaningful understanding of our past. And probably we don't have the time to go into the details about his achievements in archaeology. When he joined Deccan College in August 1939, there was no archaeology at all. There was no department of history. So a department of history was created, and Professor Sankalia was appointed a very peculiar but a very meaningful designation as Professor of Proto-Indian and Ancient Indian History. And some eminent scholars were part of the interview committee. And considering the fact that Dr. Sankalia, during his PhD work in London University, had the experience of participating in Maiden Castle, a British site excavated by Sir Mortimer Wheeler. And then later on, he also had an opportunity to take part in Mackay's Chanhudaro excavations in Sindh. Considering these field experiences of Dr. Sankalia, they called this post Proto-Indian and Ancient Indian History. And he was appointed directly as a professor with a maximum salary of 400 rupees per month. Unimaginable. Looking at the high salaries which we derive nowadays. And what is this Proto-Indian. They did not use the word archaeology, but the expert committee indeed meant and wished Dr. Sankalia all success in tapping the hard sources, that is the archaeological sources, alongside the use of the soft sources, alongside contributions to the study of ancient Indian history, also various archaeological aspects, even going behind the historical period and looking at what we now call the prehistoric past. So it was this vision which the institute had, and it was this vision which was spelled out to Dr. Sankalia. He accepted it as a challenge, and to what extent he succeeded in accepting this challenge and transforming this vision into reality. I think I will not tell you. All of you are welcome to give your own assessment. But one thing is certain: the moment he was appointed in 39, till he retired in 1973, and even after retirement, he continued to stay in the bungalow which he built with his own money on the campus, which after his wife passed away was bequeathed to the estate department of Deccan College. I don't think he devoted any time to any other pursuit except doing archaeology in the widest sense, in the most comprehensive sense. And here, I would like to invoke a criterion to assess the contribution of Dr. Sankalia in a very brief and cryptic way. What is his contribution to Indian archaeology? I would like to go back to that famous Copenhagen Danish National Museum in Copenhagen, in Denmark, in the early part of the 19th century, 1830s. See, there was one founding director called Christian Jurgensen Thomsen. He laid one criterion for assessing the legacy of a person. I think the criterion is very simple. See, we should look at the institution when it started, when the person joined the institution. What was its condition? What was its status? And what was its status when the person retired? I think if you apply that criterion, Dr. Sankalia comes up, his contributions come up in a beautiful way. He found there was no archaeology at all in Deccan College in 39. He had to start from scratch. And when he retired in 1973, Deccan College Department of Archaeology became the mecca of South Asian archaeology and one of the foremost centers for archaeological research in the whole world. I would like you to look at this criterion and assess his contribution. And this means a lot. This means a lot for the simple reason that Sankalia conceived of study of India's past not in terms of just prehistory or protohistory or epigraphy, or he thought all these branches are equally important. Not only that, he thought that archaeological deposits give non-artifactual remains, various kinds of soils, minerals, stones, animal bones, plant remains, human skeletons, and these need to be studied by experts. And that's how the idea of scientific archaeology developed. And the idea actually was mooted by Sir Mortimer Wheeler, and Dr. Sankalia, being one of his disciples, took up this idea in a very serious way and if Deccan College Department of Archaeology has various science laboratories, the credit of course goes to the vision of Professor Sankalia. And of course his successors laid many more bricks, and there's no doubt about that. But the vision was that of Professor Sankalia. Not only that, he also thought that archaeology has to take the help of various disciplines, various social sciences, various natural sciences, including geography, philosophy and anthropology and sociology and whatnot. You see, if you look at the chart which he has given at the end of his popular booklet called the Introduction to Archaeology, published in 1965, you will see, I mean, almost every discipline which are there in a university are listed, where to some of these disciplines archaeology may contribute, and archaeology may take the help of some of the other disciplines. The kind of interrelationship which he envisioned between archaeology and other academic disciplines. And of course, his work, I mean, not merely in excavating sites and publishing reports, but he also thought that India is one country where even the common people living in the remote parts of the country also have some sense of the past, and it's our obligation to reach them the final message which we arrive at after all our detailed field laboratory investigations. And it was with this view, I think he was an exception again from this point of view. He developed a good scheme of public education about the past, whether it is the large museum which we have in the Deccan College, whether it is popular exhibitions, whether it is a number of articles in English, Gujarati, or Hindi, or Marathi, which he wrote in even newspapers and popular journals. And that is how, I mean, when he passed away in 1989, in every part of the country, even the remotest parts of the country, in the local language newspapers, his death was noticed. I think this is a remarkable tribute to his vision of the study of the past, and to his vision of sharing our knowledge of the past with the community at large. I think this is. Now, coming to this topic, I mean, in what way he used the traditional sources. I think there is a lot of debate and misdirected, misunderstood debate in Indian archaeology and Indian history. That these soft sources, whether they are Puranas, whether they are epics, whether they are Sthala Puranas, whether they are legends, whether they are myths, and these are only stories, and they are not worth use in the reconstruction of the past. And lot of debate, so-called, I don't know whether it's appropriate for me to use the word Marxist sources or left. Let us use the word leftist approaches, sort of denying the importance of this. And then, of course, the opposite point of view. Oh, so these are very important, and in fact, if you don't take me amiss, I would refer to what the chairman, Professor Rao, when he was appointed as the chairman of ICHR, said, that so far only Marxist interpretation has been adopted. We would now like to, prove prove the episodes mentioned in Mahabharata and Ramayana as facts. And then, of course, immediately there was a retort um, um, from some of the historians. Oh, it appears that simple stories are now to be paraded as facts, and like this, it goes on, and on and on. And it is against this background, is a kind of a quarrelsome situation between, those who uphold the importance of traditional sources, those who sort of deny their importance, uh, scientific importance. And then it is against this background, Professor Ashish Nandi, somewhere in 1995, he chaired World History Congress, and he gave his address. And history is forgotten doubles. I don't know how many of you have read, but if you have not read, I think this is worth reading. So he said, Indian historians have become a querulous, quarrelsome lot, and they may have their own points of view, but unfortunately, see, they have forgotten that there is a parallel historical tradition in India, and that is, what common people, living in remote parts of the country, whether they are peasants or daily wage workers or whatever, even they also have some ideas, some sense of the past, and basically derived from their attendance at Harikirtans and these, before TV, radio came, there were some folk communication media, and these are there, coming right from the early historical period. For example, look at the beautiful narratives from Mahabharata or Ramayana or Puranas, which are there sculpted on temple walls. See, what are these meant for? They are not meant for worship. They are meant for educating the common people who are visiting the temple for worship. And this is actually education. You see. So this, that is how even common people in India have some sense of what we, good or bad or rightly or wrongly, call Sanatana Dharma. And it is this Sanatana Dharma which Ashish Nandi called it history's doubles. And it is this Sanatana Dharma which struck chords in the hearts of our nation's leaders like Nehru and Gandhi and so many others, who had to travel across the country for miles and miles, remote as far, and then we had to interact very closely with the common people. So they also understood that even common people have some sense of the past. I think, see. So this is how, see, I mean, and coming to, I think that Sankalia was well aware of these disputes. He was well aware, being a field archaeologist and being a person coming from a traditional family with a Vaishnavite background, exposed to stories from the epics, Puranas. He understood these various things. And that's how, when he was appointed as professor in 39, if you read his autobiography, he says, right from the beginning, apart from initiating projects in prehistory, proto-history, he was also very keen that we must tap these soft sources of various kinds, epics, Puranas, Sthala Puranas, legends, myths, and even the oral traditions. We must tap them and use them. But of course, he said, this is indeed, hypercriticism, or indeed he called it applied aspect of archaeology. This must be there. But of course, he was very clear, explicit in saying that we must use these sources very critically. We need not accept everything, but we must look at them in an objective way and accept what could be, supported by archaeological evidence. It is here that Sankalia used archaeology as what I say, as the Occam's razor for going to the ins and outs of the soft sources. To what extent they are authentic, to what extent they are unverifiable, to what extent we may use them for reconstructing our past in an objective way. So, what was, in other words, what was his response to this diametrically opposite points of view, some saying yes, some saying no. His response was both yes and no, but very critical. You see, yes, of course, no in the sense that we use them, but in a very critical way. I think it is here he lies the I mean the academic grit of Professor Sankalia. It is here his impartial, objective approach. And in fact, this impartial, non-doctrinaire, non-sectarian, is not influenced by this point of view, this point of view, this affiliation point of view, or another affiliation. See, I mean, we accept all strands of evidence, and we give equal importance. They are on a par, but we look at them objectively, accept them to the extent they are acceptable, and discard them if they deserve to be discarded. This is what may be called a pragmatic approach. And in fact, the foundations for this approach in the Deccan College, see, if there is something very distinguishing about the scholarship of Deccan College, whether it is archaeology, linguistics, or Sanskrit scholarship, or historical scholarship, it is this. It is for this reason now, Deccan College scholarship has never been branded either in India or outside India as oriented in terms of leftist, approaches, or in terms of rightist approaches. And the foundations for this approach were already laid by the great Indologist, one of the greatest Indologists of our of South Asia, Sir Ramakrishna Gopal Bhandarkar. See, it is this approach which the founders of Deccan College Postgraduate Research Institute, Professor Sankalia in Archaeology, Professor S.M. Katre in Linguistics, Professor Iravati Karve in Anthropology and Sociology, and their successors accepted. And this is the prime factor, criterion why, apart from other factors, visionary leadership, which made Deccan College a special national and internationally recognized center. Dr. Sankalia applied it wonderfully, in a wonderful way, in his own pursuits dealing with the reconstruction of India's past. Now you can ask me, what was, how did he arrive at this pragmatist approach? Avoiding the extremist points of view. I think there are three factors. One, his own Vaishnavite family background and exposure to stories from our Puranas, epics, etc. And then the lectures which he attended of F.J. Richards when he was in London University. F.J. Richards retired from India as collector, I think, administrative officer, and he gave some lectures about importance of geographical factors. He also told Dr. Sankalia that inscriptions need not be seen as chronicles giving lists of kings and their regnal years and their defeats and victories, but inscriptions could be used as sources for reconstructing India's cultural history. And then again, when he was pursuing his doctoral degree in London University between 1932, 33 and 36, he was also obliged to attend courses on ancient civilizations, the Egyptian civilization, Mesopotamian civilization, and then the Minoan civilization and Mexican civilization, Mesoamerican civilization. and he had to attend the courses, and he knew that how the major discoveries which led to the recognition of these ancient civilizations of the old and new worlds. Actually, the beginnings were made by way of trying to test the veracity of myths and legends. Think of, for example, this great German, trader, Schliemann. See, he was fascinated by the stories of Homer about the beauty of Helena of Troy, or you see the ancient palaces full of treasures, and he wanted to, identify Troy. That is, of course, Hisarlik in present-day Turkey, and he went there with his own money from Germany, and he excavated, and he was led by the stories of Homer, and he excavated his early. Probably he found some things belonging to the Homer period, but ultimately, these excavations and other excavations led to the recognition of the famous Minoan civilization. The same thing happened with uh, Mesopotamian civilization, how the legends and stories. The same thing happened with the Egyptian civilization, and the same thing happened with the Mesoamerican civilizations. How the legend recorded by one of the Spanish, missionaries, that there was a great well in the past, and then there was a great famine, and people, young girls, and gold was thrown into a deep well, and this legend attracted the attention of one Thompson, and he dug this ancient site, and ultimately the beginning of the recognition of the Mesoamerican civilization. So Dr. Sankalia was well aware of how the ancient civilizations were recognized. The beginnings were given by the clues encoded in the legends and myths. See, Dr. Sankalia, when he started, he realized that why not we use our soft sources as well for understanding our past. So it was these three sources which convinced him that in his career as an archaeologist, he would use both archaeological sources and also the soft sources, legends, stories, etc., etc. See, that are there in the epics, the Puranas, Salapuranas, and oral traditions and whatnot. See, now, see, for want of time, I will cut short. I will only say there are three aspects of Dr. Sankalia's contribution to the use of tradition or traditional sources or soft sources alongside archaeological sources for reconstructing our past. See, the first one is the use of inscriptions for reconstructing ancient cultural history. And inscriptions, of course, do give a lot of information about political history, etc., etc. But then he did, after he joined Deccan College, he worked on the Gujarat inscriptions dating from 3rd century BC to 1200, 1300 BC, and he was able to lay his hands on a variety of uh, 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 information of various kinds, dealing with what is called historical geography and cultural ethnography. See, this is a thing which he initiated in the country for the first time. See, that inscriptional study can give us information about the various administrative units that were there, can give us information about the various names of the places and how these names changed across time, across ages, names of persons, their say lineage, and names of various religious sects and various trade routes, and like this a variety of information about India's past all captured under the phrase historical geography and cultural ethnography from inscriptions. He laid the foundations, and his book was published in 1949, Historical Geography and Cultural Ethnography of, Gujarat. And for example, the ancient names, see, Pune was called Punakavishya, and in fact, he wrote an article on Bombay. It was actually, see, Mumbai, a fisherman's settlement. See, it was Mumbai. See, now of course it has come back to Mumbai. From Bombay to. Likewise, you see, if you come to Deccan College Department of Archaeology, right in front of the head of the department's room, there are two maps. One about the ancient place names of Deccan region, the other map about ancient place names of Gujarat. See, the present names and their ancient names. See, and so how did he do this? And he, with his initiative, with the beginning, wonderful beginning, he made number of research scholars at the Deccan College applied this and applied it to, I will not give the names, to the inscriptions of Deccan, inscriptions of Rajasthan, inscriptions of Uttar Pradesh, inscriptions of the Pallavas, inscriptions of the Cholas, Pandyas, and see, at least something like 10 dissertations have been done. See, so, but the thing is, what was the clue? See, it is not the use of the hard sources. It is these epigraphical sources, and used in a very admirable way. And then the second contribution. This is a major contribution to the study of cultural history of India. Probably later on adopted by others in other departments. The second important contribution is archaeology and Puranas. See, certainly, in his autobiography, he said, yes, you see, Puranas must be used. And of course, before him, there were some attempts at using the Puranic stories for reconstructing ancient history of India. Some of you will recall that Sir William Jones was the first person, I think he published 2 or 3 articles somewhere in 1784, 85, see, on Hindu chronology and ancient history. But actually, his information was based on a Sanskrit text composed at the behest of Warren Hastings, the first Governor General. He requested one of the Brahmin Pandits in the Bengal region, if I remember, it was Radhakant Sharman. He said, "You people talk about Puranas and this dynasty, that particular emperor. Why don't you, collect all this information, write one sort of small treatise?" And this Radhakant Sharman composed a treatise in Sanskrit, Purana the Prakasha, where he described, ancient rulers, ancient dynasty that, and it was this Purana the Prakasha, in my view, this is the first attempt ever made to reconstruct history of India. And it is this Sanskrit text of just some 20 pages, which was used by Sir William Jones, to make sort of more systematic attempts at arriving at the history of India, ancient India. And he said there are 4 stages recognized by Radhakant Sharman. The first 3 are more mythological. The 4th one could be accepted as historical. See, that is starting with the Magadhan dominions. And of course, he dated it to the Magadhan ascendancy, dated it to 2000 BC. Of course, you see, that was 0. But the real clues were given by this Sanskrit text composed by Radhakant Sharman, Purana the Prakasha, a gist of the Puranic sources. See? So that is the first attempt. And then, of course, later on in the 1930s, I think, Pargitar, administrative officer, I think he was a British national, and served in India. He wrote, he also was fascinated by the Puranic sources, and he wrote that famous text, Ancient Indian Historical Tradition. And he tried to reconstruct the information given in the various Puranas, history of India from about 3000 BC to about 5th, 6th centuries BC, second. See, it is this trend which that Sankalia adopted, and two of his first students, two or three of them, actually he assigned this topic. There was one, his first student at the Deccan College, PhD student, one D.R. Patil, who later on joined ASI. He worked on the cultural history as could be gleaned from Vaipurana. See? And that study required, analysis of the information in Gupta descriptions and other sources, correlation between the Puranic materials and inscriptional and other materials. And then there was one Chapekar who, produced a thesis on the iconographical elements in the Mahabharata. Like this, there was one Khapre who wrote a beautiful thesis on ancient places and place names of South Maharashtra. See, it's a very good thesis, very helpful to archaeologists, particularly those who are doing proto-history. And then Dr. Sankalia himself, you see, tried to correlate, if not very, very successfully, correlate archaeological cultures with the various dynasties, peoples mentioned in the Puranas and the epics. For example, he sort of tried to correlate the painted graveware culture, which is there in the Ganga Valley, right from the Shivaliks, Uttarakhand, and up to Magadhan region. And he thought probably the authors of the painted graveware culture, it is dated to the first millennium BC, roughly speaking, to the various peoples farming part of the Bharatas, or say Pauravas. And then you try to connect the Marwa culture of central India, with the Yadavas, and we try to connect the Jorwe culture of Maharashtra, Chalkolithic culture, Maharashtra with the Asmakas, who were, I think, very dominant in the Vidarbha region. And then, he tried, but later on, he tried to change some of his interpretations, and some of you will recall that he attributed the genesis of some of these early agro-pastoral Chalkolithic cultures to influences from West Asia, from Iran, and other regions further west. And he was led by the similarities in pottery shapes, very, specific types like, spotted pots and channel spotted bowls. And, he thought probably the ancestors of the authors of these cultures came from West Asia. See, so, but then I think toward the end, he was also dabbling with the idea that the authors of these cultures were probably, the ancestors of some of the present day tribal groups. See, and maybe, the Malwa culture authors were the ancestors of the present day simple community called the Savaras. These are very dominant, see, parts of central India and further east, Orissa, and up to the Bengal region. And then he thought that the South Indian Neolithic culture was probably authored by the ancestors of the present day community called the Boyas. So ultimately he gave sort of ethnological looked at the things from ethnological point of view. But you see, I think these are attempts which he made, and of course we can have our own points of view to what extent he is right. And even till today, there is sort of difference of opinion as to how these cultures originated. You know something about the chronology of these cultures, who were the authors, what kind of languages see they spoke. Uh, One or two foreign authors have made some attempts, but unfortunately, I mean, Indian archaeologists or Indian linguists, they have not made any joint effort to look at the linguistic affiliations or the ethnic affiliations of the authors of these cultures. But Dr. Sankalia did make a beginning. See, that should serve as inspiration. We may not agree with him. You see, he may have been right or wrong. I don't know. You see, but at least his efforts should inspire us to look at these early agro-pastoral communities, not merely from the point of view of study of ceramic types, stone tool types, etc. But see, their larger cultural affiliations, including origins. And then, of course, you know, particularly after he retired from 1973, and till the end, he was very busy with the epics. See, till now the Puranas, but the epics. See, he was, and he encouraged one of his students, Dr. Gauri Lord, to have a critical, study of the Mahabharata using archaeology as the Occam's razor, and that thesis is published as a book, Mahabharata and Archaeology. See, and he himself, toiled for years together with Ramayana. See, how much archaeology can help us in ascertaining the authenticity or otherwise of the various episodes mentioned, various peoples mentioned, various rulers mentioned, and various other things mentioned in the Ramayana. And he really, after retirement, he really spent a lot of his time and used all kinds of data, anthropological data, geographical data, even botanical data, and of course, archaeological data. And finally, as some of you will recall, he published two books, and the first one in 1973, Ramayana, Myth or Reality. And then this was followed by a more comprehensive study in 1982, if I remember correctly, Ramayana in historical perspective. See, I am very sorry to confess that I am not an expert insofar as ancient Indian texts are concerned, and I do not want to give any. But the important thing is, if you read particularly the second one, Ramayana in historical perspective, he has used all these sources in a marvelous way. See, this advanced age after retirement, going to geographical sources, going to ethnography, going to anthropology, going to botanical sources, and he spared, no stone unturned, as it were. And if you read that book, you will really realize here is Dr. Sankalia, see, in his sort of young scholar of 35 years or 40 years, and he is able to run here, there, and collect this information. And at this advanced age, he was able to collect all this information, digest it to the best possible extent, and ultimately arrive at his own conclusions. And you will see he has taken Ramayana, khanda-wise, chapter-wise. You see that Balakanda, Ayodhya-kanda, Aranya-kanda, and Kishinda-kanda, Yuddha-kanda, etc. And then finally, you see Uttara-kanda. Each one is a chapter by itself, and he discusses the episodes of each period, and then he brings in archaeology. To what extent archaeology can confirm the things being spoken about in Balakanda, or you see, other chapters. And I think this is a great example of comparative, critical, and historical approach which R.G. Bhandarkar was advocating as early as 1888. Unimaginable. Nobody, in fact, that essay of R.G. Bhandarkar is the very foundation of research methodology in modern Indian academic history, covering all disciplines. And it is that approach that Sankalia adopted here. And see, I will not go into details. I'm not really competent to give any judgment, but I think he succeeded in a remarkable way. See, this does not mean that he does not have any respect to Ramayana or the personalities there or the traditions inscribed there. But each one, you see that saying, Ravana was an ordinary figure, no 10 heads, and even Rama was an ordinary figure. Later on, he became an idol, he became a divinity. But these are normal figures, and so many things. See, I mean, and the most important thing is, I mean, he objected to this. He raised objections. What was this bridge, Setu, which Rama and his forces constructed? Not really any great bridge. It is a bridge of reeds and trees, and a very normal one. And what is this ring which Hanuman carried from Rama to Sita, who was confined by Ravana? See, were there really rings? This ring concept came much later, during the I mean Indo-Greek period. See, before that, there is no archaeological evidence of any signet rings. See, and you may find at Chaluk site, near the sites, copper spirals, but they are not rings in the truest sense. They are not true signet rings. Like this, I mean, he raised objections, and of course, his famous interpretation that Lanka of Ravan was not, Sri Lanka of present geography. It was a small, place in Dandakaranya, somewhere in the central or eastern part of the country. And for this, he had his own arguments, botanical arguments. This Dandakaranya was full of sal forests, whereas South India has no salt trees. And and Ravana was not a demon. Probably he was one of the ancestors of the present-day gold community. And this Lanka is located somewhere near Sonpur, at the confluence of the Tel River with the Mahanadi River. I think somewhere in the northwestern part of Orissa, present-day Orissa. And this was the real scene of action. See, all battles were fought in this area, and all these Rakshasas, Vanaras, they were normal human beings. They were not having tails, they were not having 10 heads, and all these stories were added to the original Ramayana. The Ur Ramayana was a simple story. See, first it was there in the form of ballads, village songs. Then these were codified into a text by the great sage Valmiki. And later on, as the ideas spread to different regions, more and more accretions, interpolations were added. And I think this process of adding to Mahabharata and Ramayana, it has not come to an end. I think even till today, local Harikirtans and the stories, we go on adding, and I think this is what is important. But so he was a bit irreverent. But this in regard to the authenticity of various events, etc., depicted in the epics, this does not mean in any way disrespect to the traditions. See, he respected it, but he had deep respect. He was I don't say he was very religious, you see, but he was very spiritual. See, he was fond of traditions of the country. Only thing is, we must accept what is agreeable, what could have been plausible, what could have been possible, and sort of, keep at bay those which are, fantasies, which are just legends, stories, and see. So this is, I think, the great thing. And of course, there were some groups in the society then, probably now, who sort of took offense, uh, you know, at his irreverent reinterpretations of the Ramayana story events, and some kind of this. And in fact, but Sankalia was not the first person to say that Lanka was in central India. There were others too, but they did not use the archaeological, ethnographic, geographical sources. And here lies the novel methodology, and which Dr. Sankalia adopted for looking at the Ramayana text in a critical way. I think, see, in these and probably other ways, Dr. Sankalia, believed that traditional sources are as important as soft sources, are as important as the archaeological hard sources for reconstructing our past. But all these sources, whether archaeological or soft sources, traditional sources, must be evaluated in a very critical way. We should not accept them at face value. We must go into them and subject them. See, you remember, Professor R.G. Collingwood, he wrote that famous book, The Idea of History. And what did he say? He borrowed this phrase from Francis Bacon, and he said, that see, when we deal with scientific, with the world around us, whether plants or animals or rocks or minerals, or we must put the evidence in witness box. He said, we must put the nature in a witness box and cross-examine it. And in fact, this is what Dr. Sankalia did to the extent possible, and without any feeling that you should undermine the tradition. Not at all. You see, he wanted to, as a scientist, he wanted to look at the evidence in an objective, dispassionate way. I think it is here. Uh, he holds a lesson to all of us. Nowadays, also, we feel, a lot of people are there who would like to use the traditional sources in a very loose way and say, that, see, we had aeroplanes, we had airports, and, etc., etc. See, all these things you have heard, see, even some of, the papers being presented at on the occasion of Indian science congresses, announcing that there were airports and Vimanas, and see, but Dr. Sankalia would not have accepted them. See. So I think it is this critical pragmatist approach which Sankalia adopted, which serves as a great source of inspiration to all of us. See, and then finally, I would like to close with one or two remarks about his humility. See, Dr. Sankalia certainly was a scholar of great caliber, but he never, wore his knowledge on his shoulders. He was very humble. See, as his students for so many years, colleagues later on, from first, from very close sources, he was a very, he was an embodiment of humility. And some months before his death, he was interviewed on All India Radio, Marathi, I think, that conversation took place. He was asked by the interviewer, what is his, greatness or contribution to study of India's past? He said, nothing very important, I tried my best. And whatever I have achieved, whatever I know, is just the size of a rice grain. Whereas the amount of knowledge that is to be achieved is of the order of a mountain. And he said this, quoting an abang from one of the very famous medieval period Maharashtrian saint, Sant Tukaram. The very fact that he took the help of Tukaram means a lot, how much he respected the teachings of the ancient saints. See, and then also, I mean, he was very emphatic that that ultimately knowledge of the past, whatever we achieved, knowledge of the past, whether past of India or any other region, ultimately it makes us realize that mankind is one, the unity of mankind. Mankind is distributed all across the globe, and various regions, various cultural styles, various languages, various religious sects, and he was an anthropologist in his own way. He said all this variety in people themselves, physical types, and in their cultural outfit. This variety is adaptational as they accord their livelihood in a particular region with reference to the climate there, geography there. They have their own, lifestyle, and all these lifestyles are on a par, equality of peoples, whether nothing like high, low. Each, even the simplest community is is bred in its own way. And in other words, he was the person who really appreciated the importance of appreciating and understanding diversity in India, whether it is religious diversity, cultural diversity, linguistic diversity, or I mean other diversity. I think this is one great lesson to all of us, because nowadays we see some kind of conflicts arising from out of identity. Oh, see, I mean India's identity is along these lines. Somebody else saying no, the identity is along some other lines. But I think Dr. Sankalia was one who appreciated this diversity, and this diversity must be accepted as the governing principle of how we look at the world around us. I think if this message is imbibed by us right from school times, I think very few of us, probably none of us, will tend to think of the world around us in a very divisive fashion. Not at all. I think here are the great messages coming from Dr. Sankalia and his career. He may not have been very religious. In fact, his autobiography says he did not follow even Vastu Puja when he entered his bangla on the campus. But this does not mean that he was irreligious. He was deeply spiritual. See, a person who is deeply spiritual is going beyond the purview of religion. See, I think this deep spirituality is attained either by seers or by true scientists. See, all true scientists are true seers, all true seers are also scientists. I think Dr. Sankalia was both a scientist and a seer who was deeply spiritual, and in a way he was Advaitic. He looked at the world, I mean, in an equitable way. Everything is equal, and that Advaitic bent of mind governed his, his career in Deccan College, his leadership in Deccan College. Dr. Sankalia was professor of Proto-Indian Ancient Indian History. He was the head of the Department of Archaeology. He was much more. He was the joint director too. And it was this Advaitic bent of mind, treating all alike, seeing one in all in one, which he had, which his senior colleagues, Professor Katre had, which Iravati Karve had. It is this bent of mind which is the real key for the success of Deccan College. See, and as I say, Deccan College, grows from level of Vishrambag Wada, started there in the heart of Pune city in a very small way. Ultimately, it became an institution of global importance. And it is this Advaitic bent of mind which, so Sankalia's leadership qualities are equally there, apart from his contribution as a senior student. He was very happy with the designation which Sir Mortimer Wheeler gave him in reviewing one of Sankalia's books. Sir Mortimer Wheeler called Sankalia student par excellence of Indian archaeology. See, I think he was very happy with that. He was a student forever, and student is a good student is one who continues to learn and learn. You see, who will never stop learning. And he was indeed the Ekabrahmana and student par excellence of Indian archaeology. And it is here he has inspiration to provide to all of us. Thank you very much for patient hearing.
Thank you, sir.
Sable, I think you have to conclude. Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
don't know, this is any occasion for questions and answers, and I think already we have spent more than 1 hour, probably. You see.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you very much, sir. We are extremely delighted to hear the details about the life history of Professor Sankalia. No one could give us this much details and heartwarming lecture about Professor Sankalia, sir, other than you. Now, with the permission, sir, I would like to. Sorry? Now, I would like to uh, present my vote of thanks, sir. Respected distinguished guests, my gurus, and my dear friends, it is my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. We owe a special vote of thanks to Professor K. Paddayya sir for taking out the time and deliver the lecture. It was warm honor for the ICHR WRC Pune to hear your ideas. Most importantly, I would like to thanks to Honorable Chairman ICHR and Honorable Chancellor Deccan College Pune, Professor Arvind Jamkhedkar sir and Honorable Vice Chancellor Deccan College, Professor Prasad Joshi sir for their support to organize this lecture. I would like to thank Honorable Member Secretary Professor Kumar Ratnam sir and Honorable Director Omji Upadhyay sir, ICTA New Delhi for their guidance and permission to organize this lecture. My sincere thanks to Dr. Jyotsna Arora ma'am, Controlling Officer ICTA WRC Pune for providing constant encouragement and motivation to hold an event like this. I would like to thank to Professor P.D. Sabale sir, Head of the Department AIHC and Archaeology, Deccan College Pune, for allowing me organize lecture jointly with the Department of AIHC Archaeology and ICHR WRC Pune. I would like to thanks to Dr. Arun Chandra Pathak sir, Senior Consultant ICHR WRC Pune, for his initiation to organize event in ICHR WRC Pune. We are indeed fortunate to have Professor V.S. Sonone sir, Dr. S.B. Ota sir, Professor S.G. Dev, Professor Krishnan sir, Professor Ajit Prasad sir, Professor Sonal Kulkarni madam, Dr. V.N. Prabhakar sir, Dr. Abhijit Dandekar sir, Dr. Srikant Ganvir sir, Dr. Hemant Dave, Dr. S.K. Aruni sir, Dr. Aarti Mukherjee ma'am, Dr. Seva Mangala, Dr. Selva Darshana, Dr. Bajpayee, Dr. Ruma Mukherjee, Dr. Suchira, Dr. Subaya, and Dr. Asta Dibyopama. Also, Muktinath Sharmaji from ICNE Northeast Regional Center and NS Babu sir from SRC. And I want to specially mention the thanks to all the most of the today's lecture. Our there are the lots of students from different parts of country. They are attending this lecture who are especially in the enrolled in the master degree of first year. There are students from Kashmir, Assam, Kerala, from Maharashtra, Gujarat. Lots of students are attending these lectures from Kolkata. Also, there are some students. I'm very thankful to Mr. Abhijit Patil to help me organize this event. And finally, I thank all the scholars from different parts of the country connected with us virtually for this special lecture. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Aruni ji. Jyotsna ma'am. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
Happy New Year to all of you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.